But there's one thing that I'm not. I'm not selfish. Now, there's nothing wrong with a little bit of selfishness. You want to go on vacation, or maybe you want to pamper yourself, or you want to live in a bigger house, fine and dandy. But to demand something that doesn't belong to you simply because you want something is pure and utter selfishness. And to demand that our government steal money from people, and you call it taxes, and it's actually thievery, is based on pure selfishness. And it's got to stop. Because at some point, somebody else is going to pay for our selfishness. And that is more selfishness, making somebody else pay for our selfishness. How much more selfish can you be than to make your family, who isn't even born yet, pay for your current living and desires? Think about, we always talk about, being careful with credit cards. Think about you having to pay it back. Think about this. What you're doing today, and this goes for you seniors that you think you're owed Social Security. Now, I hate to tell you something. I know you were promised something, but you have known for years that Social Security was in trouble. Going back to the 1970s and early 80s, you folks knew that Social Security was in trouble. I hate to be blunt, and I know some people are saying, well, Rod, our seniors. No, they weren't always our seniors. The baby boomers who are retiring today were not always retiring. They were in their 30s, 20s and 30s and 40s, and they knew back then that Social Security was in trouble. Look, I remember, people knew back in the, they were teaching or telling, kids back in the 70s. You young ones who are going to be graduating in late 70s, graduating from high school in their late 70s, early 80s. You and the generations after you guys probably won't even get Social Security. I wouldn't depend on it. And we've been telling generations ever since then, don't depend on Social Security. It's probably not going to be there. So don't tell me people didn't know. They knew. They just didn't want to set aside money for their own retirement because it would affect their current standard of living. They thought somebody else would be paying for their retirement. See, selfish. Well, pay for your own retirement or don't retire. We can't afford it. And don't tell you, well, I paid into the system. Let me tell you something. By law, and we saw this reinforced in the Supreme Court decision for Obamacare. By law, Social Security is nothing more than a tax. That benefit page that you get every year from the Social Security Administration is a lie. It's a lie because legally it has to be a lie. Because if you were to challenge them on it and say that it is your money, that you deserve it, they would take you back to the decision that made Social Security legal in the eyes of the Supreme Court, that it's a tax and Congress has the power to tax. Therefore, if it is a tax, you don't have an account. Which is also the truth behind this stupid Social Security trust fund and lockbox. They can't have one. Why? Because it's a tax, not a fund. The government has no power to set up an investment fund. It only has the power to tax. You've been taxed all your life. Frankly, you and I are not owed Social Security at all. It was a tax. Because frankly, the people who first started getting Social Security, obviously they didn't put that much in there to take out as much as they took out. Why? Because it's a tax. Plain and simple. I don't know where people come off thinking, well, it's a benefit. No, government doesn't have benefits. They have programs available that the money is supposed to come from taxation. It's an entitlement. And when we say entitlement, we call it entitlement because people think that they're entitled to it. But you're entitled to jack. Frankly, that's the truth. You and I are not entitled to Social Security, and you know this. So, anybody who's over the, if they're under the age of 80, and they tell me, well, I deserve this, I'm entitled to it. I said, no, you're not, because you knew way ahead of time that you probably were not, one, going to get enough, if anything at all. You knew! And you still didn't plan and prepare. You're not entitled to Jack. It was a tax that you paid. All taxes get spent when you're taxed, and that's it. There's no lockbox. There's no, a trust fund. There are no IOUs. The government has an IOU that it owes itself. Give me a break. And everybody falls for this crap all the time because they're selfish. Well, I want my entitlement. You're entitled to nothing. Let me make that clear. You and I are entitled to nothing when it comes to receiving money from our government. The only thing that we're entitled to is security. And that is in the Constitution for our federal government to provide for us. Military security, not financial security. Government cannot provide financial security for anyone. It is not the function of government, because government, especially modern government, in a free society like ours, does not make money. It only gets money from its citizenry through taxation. They don't go off to and have war and raid the treasuries of the enemy anymore. I mean, maybe they used to do that when we had kingdoms. And kings went to war and basically they raided the treasury of the enemy king, and that's how they got a lot of their money. No, that's not how we do that. Modern day, it doesn't work that way. The only way that we get money, the government gets money, is by taxing its citizens. Plain and simple. So you and I aren't entitled to jack. And frankly, all that spending on social programs on the federal level is unconstitutional anyway. That's stuff that should have been left to the states and would have been better administered and been more effective on a state and local level. This too, we all already know. But you're not we're not entitled to Social Security. I'm sorry, if you're under the age of 80. I'm sorry. You were sold a bill of goods, but the thing is that you were sold a bill of goods. And if you know that you were sold a bill of goods, you're only acting out of selfish interest instead of providing for yourself when you had the opportunity to at least partially provide for yourself. I'm always amazed at people, baby boomers too, who are coming up on retirement age, and they do not have anywhere near what they need to retire on. They were depending on somebody else to provide it through their company-owned 401k. Well, it wasn't even a 401k; it was their pension plan. And then they were, I'm going to have a pension and Social Security. I'm all set. I don't got to save for it. What are you, crazy? You're going to put your future life in the hands of somebody else. You're an idiot. You're a selfish idiot. I'm not going to apologize. I'm not going to back it. It doesn't make any sense. You're approaching 65 years of age, you're approaching 60, and you knew for the past 30 years at least that Social Security is in trouble, and you did nothing to provide for yourself because you were too selfish, living high on the hog when you did, depending on somebody else, and then when you get to 60 or 65 and you want to retire and you realize you don't have enough, then you want to tax somebody and take their money. Sorry, you're not entitled to it. Provide for yourself first. It's the rainy day stuff. I find it amazing that society was able to survive all of these centuries without a government safety net. I know there are probably kids today that think government safety net's been around since, like the 1st century or something. No, this is a new phenomenon. In the last 60 or 70 years, we had the birth of communism at the turn of the turn of the 20th century, but it's government provision for the general public at large at every stage of life is a relatively new human concept. And the reason why it's a new human concept is because no matter in what part of the history that we go into mankind, whenever there was some sort of socialistic or communistic type of experiment, it always failed on a small level. Forget a large level. Monarchies, and that's not socialistic. Yes, when there were problems, when there was famine or something like that, yes, monarchies and other governments, they tried to alleviate some of the suffering of the people of their kingdom or country. I'm not talking about that. That is humanitarian. That's a natural aspect. But just to provide somebody in their retirement because they didn't provide for themselves when they had the opportunity to do so, no, that's not something that government has done throughout the history of mankind. It's a new phenomenon, and we now know why it doesn't work. That's why it hasn't been done and doesn't exist. It doesn't work. So this whole notion that we need to, the Republicans need to, all this game playing. Let me tell you something, folks. Your selfishness is going to absolutely screw this country up for good. You got to stop playing the game. Well, we're just going to, drive us over the physical cliff. Well, yeah, we're going to suffer a little bit for it, but you know who's going to suffer massively? Our posterity. Because at some point in the future, probably when most of us who are alive today are no longer alive, are going to have to pay it back in some form or another. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't want my grandkids and great-grandkids and, that kind of stuff having to deal with a failed country because it's our fault, not theirs. Because my ancestry, your ancestry in this country, they left us a country intact. It is our duty to leave this country intact for our posterity. Do you not think so? I don't know why you wouldn't. Look, folks, you gotta stop thinking on a selfish note. And I know that's nearly impossible for a liberal, because also one of the things that liberals selfishly like to have is good feelings. And they think they feel good when they're ripping off a rich person, and they think they feel even better when they're giving to a poor person, even though they're not helping that poor person one iota. But because they feel good, and that is what they want to feel, the selfishness of it, not the actual reality. They could care less about the reality. It is the selfishness of the feeling. Selfishness is going to drive this country to ruin.
You said in the Rose Garden, the day after the attack, it was an act of terror. It was not a spontaneous demonstration. Is that what you're saying?
Please proceed, Governor.
It is in response to a video, a film. This is in response to a video.
Internet video that we had nothing to do with.
That was spontaneous? Was it a planned attack? Was there a terrorist element to it?
This is a response to a hateful and offensive video.
The video and its influence on the protests that occurred in Cairo and Benghazi. In response to this video, it was the video that caused the unrest in Cairo, that precipitated some of the unrest in Benghazi. It was sparked by